It has been said that culture is more caught than taught. If you visit a classical Christian school, you're highly likely to detect you are in an environment that looks and feels distinct from the culture outside the doors. Schools are intentional with details ranging from putting beautiful artwork on the walls to inspiring teachers and staff to practice hospitality and who, of course, have a contagious love of learning. Walk into a classroom and you're likely to see intentional, joyful learning, orderliness balanced with thoughtful discovery and learning. Culture happens by purposeful effort on the part of the school, and it is complemented by the culture parents reinforce at home. Join us for this episode as we look for best practices that impact culture and the next generation.
Mountains, we all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to Basecamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to yet another episode of Basecamp Live. Davies Owens, your host here. It's such a joy each week to come and be in a conversation with you. Although, to be honest, it's kind of a one-way conversation because I feel like I do all the talking, or my guest and I get to do all the talking, which is, by the way, what a podcast is all about. But I'm very grateful for the times that it becomes a two-way conversation when you take a moment and you email me, info@basecamplive.com, and just give me a shout out. Honestly, if it's just a sentence and say, hey, I'm listening from, and then wherever you're listening from, it's just great to know where you're out there. If you want to take a few more sentences and tell a little bit of your story, just love hearing from you. So that's my first request. The second, which I've been talking about the last couple of weeks, is we have a very important survey that is up on the Basecamp Live website right now. It'll be there through the month of October. And we are very much eager to hear your thoughts and input. It takes about 5 minutes. It will be very appreciated as we consider revisions, updates, improvements, changes, whatever you want to say, for what I'm calling Basecamp Live 2.0 that'll be starting in January. Again, a lot of exciting things coming with my friend Keith McCurdy. We're going to be doing some Live Sturdy special episodes. There's a lot. I don't want to give it all away right now. In fact, we'll do kind of an end of year, what's coming next. Dedicated podcast, kind of state of the podcast that I can't wait to share with you. But I really do need your input, and it's super helpful. Thank you for those who have taken the time to do it. As a thank you to you, a little incentive. It's always fun to have the old kind of raffle option in the background. So we will be choosing someone who has filled out the survey to receive a $100 Amazon gift card that I'll be announcing the first week in November. So please take just a moment, basecamplive.com, which is a helpful site if you've not been there. The best feature of it, other than the survey right now, is you can go in and hit search, and you can look up based on prior guests or topics. It's a pretty good way to search through what is almost 7 years of podcasts. So that's part of the improvement. We're going to have better indexing, better ways to sort through, find the top 10 episodes of all time, or episodes that might be helpful to new parents or new staff, all that kind of good thing. Those kinds of good things are coming. So lots to talk about there, but thank you for being able to do that survey and for sending in info at Basecamp Live shout outs. And of course, always appreciate 5-star reviews when you're out there on Apple Podcasts and other places that ask for those reviews. I do appreciate it. So today is yet another conversation around this idea of forming culture, which you hear me talk about all the time because we are increasingly countercultural. But what does it really mean to create a robust culture that's beautiful and attractive, and that students want to be a part of it? And at the end of the day, as we battle for the loves and affections of the next generation, we want to create such a winsome environment in our schools and our homes that why would you want to go anywhere else or do anything else? This is the hope and the aspiration. So my guest today, Dr. David Stanton, has been a seasoned head of school, but prior to all of that, he was in the military. And the folks that are coming from other environments into leading schools often bring perspectives that are super helpful. David is the headmaster of Oakdale Academy, and his passion for classical Christian education is contagious there. And he brings a lot of experience, like I just said, from not only the military world, where he was 21 years of honorable service in the United States Navy, and he achieved the rank of commander. He served a variety of units supporting U.S. European Command, the Office of Naval Intelligence, U.S. Central Command, and was deployed 2 times to Afghanistan and to Bahrain. So a lot of experience and a lot of understanding of the formation of culture in people and it certainly is bearing a lot of fruit for him there. And so this is a really, I think, encouraging episode in that we really look at what are the nuts and bolts that make healthy culture in his school and in schools around the country, and certainly in homes as well. So without further ado, I want to invite you into this great conversation with Dr. David Stanton. And before we do, just say a quick thank you to our platinum sponsors on this episode, the Focus Group, CLT, the Classic Learning Test, CAP, Classical Academic Press, and the Good Agency. We appreciate your partnership and support. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. David Stanton. Well, David Stanton, welcome to Basecamp Live.
Thanks, Davey. It's always great to be with you and catch up with you.
Yeah, well, it's really special to have somebody who's got such a unique journey to becoming a head of school and the many things you've learned about culture along the way. So you were 17 years in public school education, teaching, and administration. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, 17 long years, but 17 years, yeah.
Probably makes you grateful every day when you get up for work that you're in a classical Christian school environment. So, and then 21 years of honorable service in the Navy, rank of commander. First of all, thank you for your service to our country.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So you must have some really fascinating contrast thinking about your days being a naval intelligence officer, central command, to being in a classical Christian school. I mean, when you've toured Afghanistan and Bahrain, and then you have a middle schooler come in for discipline, you probably have some experiences to lean on that most leadership does not. Is that true?
Absolutely. It's when you deal with teenagers who are given a lot more responsibility than perhaps the average teenager is. They're guarding you. More often than not, you can appreciate what students are capable of, and but it does lend us a certain gravitas to your office when you have a sword in it, I suppose.
Did you make students do push-ups and things like that when they're?
Well, no, I just stopped to the joy of my students teaching PE class for the boys, so we're out of the now. So
300 chin-ups. Let's go. Yeah,
we did just get new monkey bars outside, so maybe they'll reinstitute them.
Yeah. Well, no, I remember probably know Ralph Janikowski, who's
down in Tennessee, yeah.
Navy guy. Yep. So you guys have a lot to bring to the world of the school, and it's very apropos to our topic today on culture, because there's, as we've talked about, there's no neutral culture in schools. You can't avoid culture, but the idea is to help form it and shape it. But before we get into all that, just share a little bit more about this, because your military service, I'm sure it does inform and guide your leadership at the school. What other ways do you bring that to bear kind of in the way you live out leadership at the school?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, Davies. It's fascinating because when you think just from a culture perspective, right? The Navy, the military has its own just defined culture. When you come in, for example, when you go through boot camp in the Navy, the Marines are perhaps more famous for this, but we don't want to give them too much credit. But each of the branches has their own unique way of doing things. So at the end of Navy boot camp, when you go through something called battle stations, you take off the ball cap that says recruit on it, and you put on one that says Navy, and they shake your hand and say, welcome aboard, sailor, because you're now part of that culture. And, just even the rank structure and the way that we do things, the uniforms, all divisions that show that there's something that you're aiming for. And there are values that the organization supports and shows that are more important than anything else. From morning colors, when the flag goes up the mast every day, every car stops on base, everybody stands at attention, and everybody faces the flag. And those things translated to a school, because you might not have the same level of order and discipline. We're not actually dropping students for push-ups all over the place, at least yet. But but there's something special about a school as well, because you get to help provide that order. But at a classical Christian school, we're pointing them to something greater than even their country. When we point them to the Lord, we're saying all the things that we're doing are geared towards, making you a better human being so that you can serve God in your life. And so there's a lot of carryover there. There's a lot of, we do rewards and awards here in schools, just as we do in the military. You almost have a concept, academically at least, of a meritocracy, right? If you perform well, you get a better grade than other students do. But we also reward just that diligence and effort that students put into it. And then we want to be broader than just our school. So, in the Navy, it's your Navy family, right? Is you have family days and family picnic days and all those things to bring your family in because families serve just as much as the sailor or officer does. So in a school, you want to bring a family together as a community as well, and include, church life as well, because you realize at a certain point you can't do this in a vacuum, and you have to have the support of a broader community. So those are just a couple of thoughts really quickly on how culture carries over there.
And again, I think what you intuitively get because of your background that I think it's hard for us as parents today and as school leaders is that we live in a culture of hyper individualism. And I mean, you've got a moment in our culture right now where even broad secular parents are fully relinquishing authority in many cases in their home and allowing students to kind of self-discover their way through life, and they can do no wrong. I mean, so we are so far to that extreme that we know that's not right, but I think it's hard to find that balance in our homes and in our schools right now with this sort of desire for our students to be individuals and to kind of own their own educational journey and yet be submitting to a larger culture, a larger vision. I remember a number of years ago, David, there was a graduate of the Ambrose School that went to the Naval Academy, and I remember chatting with him when he came back over Christmas break, and I just said, what were your impressions? And one of the comments was how fascinating it was in that first orientation week, the effort that the Naval Academy went to basically say, hey, you're not, it's not all about you. You're joining now into a long flow of history, and you are on the way to becoming a graduate of the Naval Academy, and there's prestige with that, there's honor with that, but it takes a lot of work. And so by the time they had gotten through this orientation week, this student was more than willing to have the academy do whatever was required of them, get them up at 5 a.m. and do push-ups in the mud puddle or whatever it was going to take, because they were aiming at something bigger, and there was a culture of excellence around them. And I think that's something that we struggle with as schools today, especially, and maybe even parents looking in saying it just seems so prescriptive. And, there's pushback now from a lot of younger families on uniforms and all of these things. It just seems to, increasingly we're flying in the face of the culture, broader culture, when we establish our school culture. So what do you see with some of those tensions?
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, Davies. And it's one that I spend a fair amount of time thinking through is how do you, classical Christian education, if you think of it just from a marketing perspective, there's some easy parts that it's easy to sell. And then there are some really hard parts. It's kind of like selling the conservative side of the political aisle. Like you have to work. It's not an easy sell
right.
nowadays. But what you want parents to start to see, and what I hope that the parents here at Oakdale and parents across the country, and even growing, into England, Australia, and Africa, are seeing is you are part of something bigger. This is not just an isolated, tiny little place that happens to want to study Latin across the board and wear uniforms just because it's old fashioned. I love the phrase that you used, this culture of excellence. One of the things that we did last school year was we brought a group of students, a group of parents, and myself, and we wrote an honor code for the school because we wanted, we have all these statements, we have these things that we say, these important words that we have. For us, it's character, it's truth, and it's wisdom. But there isn't this one thing that kind of absolutely unites us. Certainly our beliefs in the Lordship of Jesus Christ and those things that are of first importance. But when you boil things down to a school, what does it look like? And we put words in there to kind of evoke those emotions of that you do belong to something better. And we're starting. I can't believe I'm going to give a compliment to the Army, but the Army does it even better when at West Point, you're part of the long gray line, right? It stretches back, and you think of all the great heroes of West Point. All the heroes of the Naval Academy. And we want to start that process at a school that's 13 years old. When our our senior class will be the first graduates who've been here all the way through. So when we tell them that you're going to be a steward of Oakdale Academy, and then we can take time to explain what that means. And then we can talk to parents, because one of the best things that happened was the parent said, it's great that the kids have an honor code. We want one too for us, which I said, absolutely. So, and then there's one for the faculty and staff as well. And they have similar phrasing to them about the high calling of a liberal arts education, and goodness, truth, and beauty are things that we we want to learn about throughout our lives. So,
Yep.
there's a lot of good carryover of showing that culture of excellence and starting that historical path to being a graduate of Oakdale Academy, the Ambrose School. Put the name of the classical Christian school that's either a startup or thriving. There's something special about graduating from there.
Well, and we're going to talk later in the podcast, get very practical around what you are doing to train your leadership and your faculty, and then what we can be doing in our homes to create culture. But one thing you're talking about, David, that I'm such a proponent of, in fact, I will often, to be a bit provocative, will say our students are the most neglected population in our schools, and people look at me like I'm crazy. And what I mean by that is neglected in the sense of, have we really taken the time to cast a vision for where they're going? And I think a lot of times, of course, students start at 6 years of age and dutifully put their uniforms on and ride the minivan over to the school. But where along that process do we invite them into this journey, to this process, to this enculturation that they're a part of? Or if we don't, I think we're at risk of it just looking kind of like, frumpy throwback education folks over here in the uniforms. We've never, especially when the kids down the street don't wear uniforms and they're having a whole lot more fun, it looks like. So,
yeah,
how do you, I think that's a big part of that, bringing them into an understanding and value of the culture that's being formed around them.
Yeah, and it's an interesting take, right? Because one of our board goals is to be a school of choice for our students, and we tend to think of your upper or your rhetoric school students, your high school students, and we want them to want to be here. The natural inclination then is, well, that means a beautiful facility and a gorgeous campus and the best of everything and championship sports and all those. And those are good things to have. There's nothing wrong with them. But even from younger ages of just talking with the students, at lunch to go around and visit with the students. What's the best part of your day? What's something that you would fix about the school?
Wow.
We do, our upper school has once a month a convocation where we just come down and it's tough sometimes. It turns into a kind of a complaining session at times, but the kids know that we're going to listen to them and we're going to act on the things that make sense. We tell them we want to say yes until we can't, right?
Wow.
If you just say, what's the average student council back in the day is, I'm going to make sure that I talk to the head of school to get a pop machine and longer recess. And when they come and they say no, that's the end of the whole platform, right? There's student council for the year. We want them to kind of continue to drive the ship, as if I could use one analogy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's an appropriate analogy. And we're going to get into some of those ways that you block and tackle that. But I think the message that I'm so encouraged that I hope other schools will take on, that parents will appreciate and support at home, is that there is an intentionality to the formation of culture. And it's not just something you figure out when you're a grammar schooler, because the grammar school culture is very different from the middle and upper school culture. And we really need to help students kind of own and lean into that. So before we take a break, let's talk a little bit about just kind of get everybody on board with this notion of kind of, well, what is culture and why is it so important? It's a word that's actually pretty hard to define. And yet it's really important. Peter Drucker says that culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is a pretty memorable quote that, we can have all the great portraits of graduates and mission statements, but boy, that culture, which somebody said is the living embodiment of what your organization values. And I love this because it's really what's there on a regular day. If you show up at your school, on a Thursday at 10 a.m., that's your culture. Right. It's not just what happened at, open house or parent education night thing. It's the ebb and flow of every day. So from your vantage point, what is culture, if you had to explain it simply, and why is it so all encompassing of everything you do?
Yeah, again, a great question, Davies, because it's not an easily defined thing, because you can list off a bunch of activities that we do, a bunch of programs that we have, but it is very much what you said. It's a list or a series of things that just show what it is as an organization that you value. There's another great quote that's something along the lines of, you show what you value by how much money you spend on something. I'd say in a school, it's more how much time or dedicated effort you put into something, right? So a student, you can tell, is going to value their academics by the amount of time they put into them. And a culture then is exactly what you said. It's showing up at any given hour, any given day, and just seeing what goes on. So it's little things from modeling what we expect our students to do. It's the language that we use. when we talk about virtue cultivation, and it's when we discipline a student that there's a redemptive quality to the discipline. It's how we include our parents right from the beginning, even in the admissions process, by reminding them, these are your children. We are here to partner with you. We're not here to take them over as the school down the street will do until they're 18. And we expect you to be involved in that. That's part of our culture, is we want our parents there. So it's the whole picture. And it has a faculty and staff component, because you want to be a good employer, but you want to also challenge your teachers and your staff to continue to develop themselves. It has a student piece, as you said, which are the often forgotten ones in the school, which is crazy ironic in so many ways, because they're why you're here. And so what do they enjoy about school, and how do you continue to shape them in the methods that you use? And then there is the parent piece. How do you come in? How do you support what happens at home? And how does the home support what happens at school? And how do you together, in a Christian sense, how do you support what happens in a church? And how do we kindly challenge each other to make sure we're pointing the student in the correct direction so they can, really grow in their faith? So, it's like all those things. It's this nebulous, like all of them are culture, and you're balancing them all the time. But like if you go into a classroom within 5 minutes, you can tell if you have a really good teacher. You can go into a school and tell if it has a good culture, whether it's growing, it has some struggles. But you get a sense that everybody kind of knows where we're headed. Everybody knows what's going on. And it's more than just the bell rings so everybody gets up and leaves. That's just movement. That's not culture. But when they're moving through the hallways, how do the students carry themselves? How do the teachers carry themselves? What does their interaction look like? Is it respect? Is it fearful? Hopefully not. But is it a mutual respect that takes place because we're learning together? I think it's a great snapshot. Yeah. I love how you said just show up on a Thursday at 10 o'clock.
And there it is. Yeah. And you can tell pretty quickly. I mean, sometimes it doesn't even, you can pick up a school's culture before you've even left the parking lot, just in terms of, is the signage totally confusing? You can't even find the office, and like, well, they don't even really communicate well around here. That's not a value. So, I mean, everything is culture and everything's a part of that. So I think Drucker's right about that. Why don't we take a quick break? I want to come back. We're going to get into just some of these specifics. You just listed about 15 amazing questions. Yeah. And, how do we form this culture as leaders, as administrators? How do we create a vision for our students, and how do we do it in our home? We're going to really spend the rest of the podcast trying to unpack practically, because I think you guys are really, a model school in many ways in terms of the attention. And it's really this simple, David. I just don't think as often as we should, we talk about culture. We talk about, again, strategic plans and mission statements and portraits of graduates. But this is that, again, Thursday at 10 a.m. stuff that really matters. And I'm so excited that you're being so intentional. We'll be right back and continue our conversation.
This episode of Basecamp Live is sponsored by the Graduate Leadership Program at Gordon College, a nationally ranked Christian liberal arts college located just north of Boston. Earn your master's or education specialist degree in leadership in a program uniquely tailored to the classical renewal movement. Our hybrid learning model includes online classes for flexibility and on-site residencies during the summer. Study a wide range of material, including everything from the philosophy of classical Christian education to law, finance, and advancement. To learn more about how we are equipping rising and aspiring leaders in the classical Christian movement, visit us at gordon.edu/graduate/classical.
David, we were saying in part one that really there's no such thing as a non-cultural school. Everything is culture. And obviously the world outside our doors is increasingly, as Os Guinness talks about, kind of we're in a cut flower moment where the Judeo-Christian values of our broader culture, that flower was cut probably 50 years ago, and we've sort of been slowly wilting. And I think at this point, it's safe to say that when students walk into our schools, parents come in, we are countercultural. We're just a totally different world. And I think more than any other time, we've got to be both aware of the culture we're trying to create and really apologist for what we're doing, because otherwise, is like we talked about before, we're just kind of weird Amish school people. We just wear funny uniforms and love old books, and what's this all about? So the real rubber meeting the road is onboarding. It begins, I think, with leadership. So talk a little bit about how you, as head of school, cast vision and articulate culture when it comes to your faculty and staff, and And what does that look like? And then we'll talk a little bit about how that then informs student culture. So talk about your leadership team.
It's been a joy to do that very thing over the last couple of years in particular. So as we developed a leadership team and now what I'm calling also an executive team, but ultimately the core leadership of the school, we took a look at all the things that we were doing and spending our time in, kind of similar to what we talked about in the last segment. And so I stumbled across, through my father-in-law, who was a human resources executive for years, the work of a guy named Patrick Lencioni. And Lencioni talks about dysfunctions of a team and how to run meetings effectively. And we just kind of wholesale adopted a lot of his ways of doing things, which cut down on what most, I think, school leadership teams probably spend time on, which is all the administrative minutia of a school, right? Which you need to do. You've got to make sure all the forms are done correct. You want to be legally sound and all that. But we could then have some tough conversations and build a trust with each other where you can push in on things. And so then we dedicated this year in particular just to study culture as our primary thing. And it doesn't mean that, curriculum goes by the wayside and how to teach goes by the wayside, but culture became the main thing. And so this morning, even my executive team was wrestling through a tool that you had used down at the SCL conference in Dallas and trying to map out and answer some really, really hard questions. I'd forgotten how hard the questions were that you came up with. We're going to have to hit pause because the other thing with my team is this is not an easy one and done conversation. It's got to be continual, a renewing conversation. And from there, we spent about half a day of professional development with the faculty, down to that level. Then what do you see the culture as? What are those rituals? What are those, liturgical things that we do at this school that keep us going? At the same time, we're also focusing on the students and how to do it. But it has to start with the leadership, I think, in any organization. If I go back to, Navy times, if you take command of, a unit, a squadron, a ship, whatever it is, you immediately, one of the first things you do is you meet with your troops and you lay out your vision, but you also lay out what your culture is going to look like and how it complements the, in that aspect, the greater Navy culture, whatnot. And so a lot of that flows from me as the head of school of these are the things that I find important. But that's also runs through my executive team. It's not just, he's in there in his office just kind of deciding what culture is going to be. It's got to be a team-based approach to make sure that we're all on board. So working it through that leadership and then funneling it down, listening to each of those kind of constituencies as you come through, even as I was saying with the honor code, bringing other people involved has been really helpful. It's been a really, again, I forgot how hard the questions were that you posed in Dallas, but it's been really for us to wrestle through.
Yeah. Well, and I think and I'm excited to see you guys really try to sort this out. And most, the exercise that you're talking about is one that, again, I think a lot of times there are things we can borrow from our secular business friends out there. And, you take a large airline like Southwest Airlines, they go through that. They want to know what their culture is going to be. And they have a definite culture. When you get on their plane, it just has a different feel. Can the flight attendants make jokes or can they not make jokes?
When you said Southwest, I knew exactly what you're going to say.
Right. Because, if you're on a Southwest flight, you think, well, wow, they got a rogue flight attendant up there cracking jokes. Like, no, that's actually part of what they worked really hard to say that's part of the culture we want to create. And I think that's, I think the problem is we too often just decide, like you said, behind closed doors, this is what we're going to do. We're going to value, excellence with our uniforms, and we don't want anybody to not be in uniform. Right. And so we're going to just do drive-by, kind of like writing speeding tickets to kids in the hallway because their uniforms aren't. And we've never kind of given them a value or a vision for why should your uniform be worn correctly? Why do you even wear a uniform? Talk about that, because obviously in the military, you don't show up with your shirt on backwards and make a joke out of it. There's a reason for showing up correctly dressed.
Yeah. And what we do, and it reflects something else that I thought of as you were talking. There's so many great models, and one of the ones in the military, somebody I was talking to this past weekend about it, who was a Marine veteran, said, this person that we're kind of reminiscing about is a great leader because they reflect the notion that your clipboard is your office. So you're not in the office all the time. Yep, there are times you have to be in your office. You've got to get some work done, but you're out amongst the students, you're out, working with them, and you are listening because, especially that middle and high school, fourth, fifth, grade on up, they have, that a beautiful ability that Dorothy Sayers reminds us of, that they like to argue. I mean, they like to because they want to figure things out. It's not arguing just because, they're the prototypical teenager. And so you can talk to them about, well, you wear a uniform because you're part of something bigger, and we want to help you focus on the right things, the first things, which is not what your neighbor's wearing. In one simple example of why you wear a uniform, but you're out there, you're meeting the kids, you're shaking their hands, you're getting to know their names, which is not a strength of mine. So it's, constantly training that, that muscle to make sure that they see who you are. You're not one of the leaders that, it's like, who's that guy at graduation with all the, stuff on, who is that guy?
Right. Yeah. And you're approachable. And again, cultures, whether it's home or school, it's much more caught than taught. And so it's really, and it's the stuff you allow. I mean, if you allow teachers to show up 5 minutes late to meetings, then that becomes your culture. That's how it works. Or if their front office phone always goes to voicemail because people are too busy, then that's the culture. And what does that say to parents? I mean, there's 1,000 examples of what this looks like. So thinking about practical examples, again, kind of staying in the lane of your executive team. And I know you heard me talk about this in the workshop I did on forming culture. Horst Schulze's book, Excellence Wins. He's the founder of the Ritz-Carlton Corporation. And while we're not hotels, what I do find interesting is just at every staff change, he will assemble the team that's coming in, and then they'll actually pick a particular aspect of their culture and talk about it and celebrate it. So it's a daily drip of cultural alignment. Can you give some examples of just sort of, other than not locking your door in your office, but actually getting out there? I mean, where you've had to kind of walk next to your staff to really kind of bring them into alignment, help them catch the vision. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, we also do a daily check-in, a little different than how he does, because we talk about the things that are pressing in on us that day. So what are your big targets that you were working on today? What are issues that we can work on together? Because our cultural focus as a team has been on building up a team, right? Because we've been very siloed in schools for so long that, you're in charge of the middle school. You only deal with middle school things. We want everybody involved in, hey, here's a situation I have coming with a student. Here's a potential, complaint we have coming from a family. Here's what the athletic department is working on. And then I can kind of give them a top level thing of, what I'm working on. But we've also developed the most important minute or so of our day is at 7:29 a.m., right before the doors open, is the end of every one of those meetings is, as a leadership team, we pray for the school. And so prayer has become part of our culture. It's always something we do with the students. We're actually going to change next week because the bell just rings at 3:15 and that's it. They all leave. We're going to pause at about 3:13 and we're going to do a closing prayer. And it's something we debated as a leadership team. Is this something we should be doing? Why wouldn't we? Well, kids are trying to get out for drop off. Parents are coming by and all that stuff, and said, yeah, we decided together that's all good, but we still need to remember why we did the things we did today and who we did them for. And we need to thank him for making it through the day. So that's one finite example that's happened just in the last week, that we've really said prayer has got to be one of the most important things that we do here, and how we wrestled through it. Normally that's just one person makes a decision, everybody goes with it, but we wrestled with it as a team, which was really good.
Well, and you wrestled with it. How do you actually, the outworking of it? And I think again, kind of two audiences. So we're talking about what this means in the context of school leadership, but in our homes, it's the same scenario. Well, I mean, I would like to think if you put a survey in front of Christian parents, check the boxes. Do you value prayer? Yes. Do you value quality time? Yes. You can do all that all day long, but what are you going to do? Like, what does it really look like? And I mean, what you just described is a fairly, very intentional and even sacrificial effort that you're having to make to say, no, we're really going to do it. We're going to make prayer more than just a token thing that we do, after a morning gathering or something. So,
right. And it goes to, I mean, I know we possibly want to talk about this later, but we want to reflect then for our families. You sent your children here in part for this reason. We have classical, but we have Christian as well, in what we do. And so we want to reflect back to you as families. This is why this is so important, because it's more than getting into college. It's about preparing and discipling students, and prayer should be at the top of it, bringing song into, our chapel services on a much more regular basis, all things to point upwards, in addition to that horizontal relationship we have with each other and explaining those things to each other, but doing those things that point us to the Lord and explain them. For me with my team, that's our biggest challenge, is to make sure that we then go and explain things out from the decisions we make so people understand why we're doing it. It's not just the team now rather than the one guy.
Well, at the end of the day, there's, like everything, it's a sacrifice of time, which is such a limited commodity. But you guys have said culture is important, and therefore we're going to have to take time to not only articulate and define it, we've got to then make sure it's happening in the life of the school. And you were talking about prayer. I've always remember years ago, this is probably 15 plus years ago, when I was head of school in Atlanta, there was an individual from ACSI, and early on we were ACS. That's a longer story of why we were even there. But to their credit, ACSI had sent a guy out basically to survey Christian schools and try to figure out what does Christian discipleship look like in the context of a school. I thought this is a really interesting question. I shared with them what we were doing. Then I said, well, you're all over these schools. Tell me some best practices you've seen. And I'll never forget what he said. He said there was one school he was a part of that talked about the value of prayer, but they lived it in such a specific way that he said it was not uncommon that there would be a prayer need in the life of the school that would warrant the head of school getting on the PA system and interrupting class to say, students, sorry for the interruption. I want to ask everyone would please take a knee by their desk. We're going to pray for a particular need. And this wasn't like, 9/11. I mean, this is just like, fairly reasonable prayers that are coming through. But they made it a common practice to actually interrupt the educational moment, to take a knee, to pray school-wide for something. And it was 30 seconds or 45 seconds, and they were back to class. And I thought, wow, what impression would that make if that became part of your culture on your school when it comes to prayer? All of a sudden, prayer is a very tangible, experiential reality of most of your school days. I mean, everybody's like, wait a minute, you can't interrupt math class. I'm like, well, but what if you did? I mean, what if we really claimed that? So again, hopefully, if nothing else, our conversation here is just stirring up folks saying, okay, wait a minute, everything is culture and everything is influencing. So is it going the direction we want, or do we need to be more intentional? So on that note, David, why don't we take another break? I want to come back, and I do want to delve into the land of home life and look at just what are some best practices that you advise your parents on in terms of forming healthy home culture. We'll be right back.
I'm Brad Leyland, CEO of the Focus Group. The Focus Group is a fundraising consulting firm, and our mission is to help build the kingdom of God by helping nonprofits raise all the funds they need to fulfill their missions. Our vision is to see God make all things new, and I see this happening through the classical Christian movement. Over the past decade, we've helped dozens of classical Christian schools around the United States develop strategic plans, learn to have a relational approach to raising money, and launch capital campaigns to grow their campuses. I've also had the privilege of helping start Veritas Classical School in my hometown, St. Augustine, Florida. I also enjoy serving on the Society of Classical Learning's board. The Focus Group is honored to play a role in the growth of this very important movement. If your school is ready to take its fundraising to the next level, we'd love to talk with you. For more information, please visit us at thefocusgroup.com/classical.
David, today in our world, we hear the term multicultural thrown around a lot. I think it's probably actually a good term for one of the tensions that can happen when students show up at our schools and they're dutiful and they follow all of the rules and regulations and put on the uniforms, and they look outwardly like they're really doing what we've asked, and yet the culture of their neighborhood and their friend group is a very different culture, and they're very comfortable in that one as well. And that's not what we want. We want students that are truly loving the true, good, and beautiful, and loving what God loves, and they're true in season and out of season, in school and out of school. And there's a continuity between school life and home life. And I think that's one of the biggest tensions, because we're not boarding schools, which I don't want to be. Kids aren't staying at school; they go home. How do we help our families? How do you help your families and help your students with sort of owning that culture and then carrying it on when they're off campus?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. One, again, I spend a lot of time thinking through, because And I'll be honest up front. It was an area that initially, when I came to classical Christian schools, I kind of dipped my toe in more than just plunged in all the way, because my experiences in government schools are we took care of everything. Like, you drop them off at 3 or 4 years old, and you pick them up when they're 18, and your summer camps, everything. We feed you breakfast, lunch, and someday probably dinner too. And so it was like I was so hesitant to jump in. As I've grown in my own role, and as I've seen what happens outside of our the confines of our building and our churches and our homes, I realize the importance we have to kind of group those three together, that three-legged stool concept. And so we make all of our cultural decisions, as we were talking about last segment, very intentionally. And so one of the things that we hope to do this year is pour into families some more. So we have, like many schools have, a parent education piece. We call it Oakdale U because it sounds really cool and make it sound like they're getting college credit for something. But we teach them the same things that we're teaching the kids. But we also have developed specifically some just parent roundtables that we're getting ready to launch, where I fully intend to just say, I don't have all the answers here, folks. Here have been my experiences. Let's talk about this together as adults, as parents, and let's try and help each other. I think the most exciting thing, and I borrowed this from a friend, Matt Beatty, who 10 minutes away at Bloomfield Christian School, who did videos just for dads. And so I did my first video just for dads. And almost that beautiful thing that you see in church ministry sometimes. I had a dad who came to me and said, I am forming a group called Oak Dads, for Oakdale Dads, and we're going to have a campfire at your school. And I said, well, let's get a permit. And we did. And he's going to do a campfire next week here just to fellowship with dads, to get dads involved at the school. He has about 30 dads, I think, that are plugged into this. And it's so thrilling because there's a natural connection there that was not just the school doing. In other words, we've set up a community where you care enough that you're going to pour in time outside of pick up and drop off to do that. So that's been one area.
That's a beautiful example. I love that.
So exciting.
Yeah, and I think that it's a natural byproduct of our 5-day a week, or even if you're in a hybrid school. I mean, we're doing life together. And so what does it look like to be intentional, especially dads? Because I think they have the hardest time finding their place sometimes in the life of the school, and they have so many needs and questions, and you're helping to formulate. I love that, because if dad's on board, chances are home culture is going to be even more in alignment.
Absolutely. I mean, how many families, when we look at, all the Barna Group studies down in Dallas of people walking away from the faith, and, if a dad's not leading his home as a Christian father, that makes it easier to meet those statistics. So to be able to pour into them, as dads, as parents ourselves, and to say, here's where we can help. Let's speak a similar language with each other. Here, let me explain to you why we do the things that we do here, because I love your support and I love your input.
Yeah. So that's a great example, very practical, of ways to help bring alignment, to help prepare folks in the home, be it dads in that case. What are some other examples of ways you've helped to bring cultural alignment between school and home?
Yeah, we will always talk about in classical Christian schools this thing called parent partnership. And it's, as with culture, it's a nebulous thing. What does that really mean? I think most people would think, well, that means we give in, or parents give in, and our side is right or your side is right. So we actually took some time to define what that actually means when we say partnership with our parents. And every time I have a chance to get up in front of parents, I tell them, it means I'm going to assume the best about you, and I'm asking you to assume the best about my team and me. If I believed everything a student said about you as a parent, I'd probably be calling Child Protective Services a lot. If you everything they said about us, I can't believe you'd ever send your kids to our school anymore. So, we're in this together. When those kids realize there are more of them than there are of us, and we've got to be on this together. But we actually, even in our admissions process, did some videos about parent partnership and said, these are important things, because if you're going to be here, we need to make sure you're a good fit for us, because most people think of admissions of, please come to our school, please come to our school. Mm-hmm. And there's part of that, but we also want to make sure you're going to fit well in this school? Do we align with the things that are of importance to you? Do we reflect what you do as a family? And we can help along those lines, but from the beginning, we don't want you frustrated. We don't want you to think, nobody told us this. They sold us a bad bill of goods. No, this is what we mean when we say partnership. So it's, I actually quiz parents at the admissions interview. What does a partnership mean to you? Put it in your own words. And then we have a conversation about what that looks like. I stole from another school because the beauty of schools is you can always steal from each other as long as you cite each other. So there's a school in Pennsylvania that did these community nights, and we went around to people's homes at small groups and said, here's our vision going forward. Here's what we mean when we say partnership. Give us some feedback on this. So it was real-time feedback, and you really get, more of the parents engaged with you. When you have snacks and desserts, it's easier because you're just sitting down in somebody's family room, hanging out with parents and talking about their most precious, commodity, if you will, their kids, and kind of bringing those walls down so that they can really understand what you mean and you can understand them too, and how we're all working together. We shouldn't be pitted against each other. We should be working together for God's glory, but certainly to disciple these beautiful children that we have.
Well, and I think it's important, David, too, for folks listening, knowing kind of where you're coming from. This isn't gather the parents and then just talk about why the school uniforms have to be worn the way the school says they need to be worn. I mean, it's not just come and hear, oh parent, what we, the school, think is important. As you said, it's really, we want to help you have a beautiful home life. We want to, where things are true, good, and beautiful are prioritized in your home. What does that mean? Because these are not intuitive things for most, especially younger parents who are maybe new in this process. I often quote the somewhat unsettling Pew statistic that says that only about 20% of millennial parents live within a 100-mile radius of their extended family, which just means that most young families really don't know where to turn to get best practices. And again, it is a cut flower moment. There's not just don't go down the street and ask your neighbors for how to parent. You'll learn all kinds of things that you probably don't want to know.
Right. And
we need to guide each other.
Yeah. And this is where I was thinking about this today with my team. In many ways, this is almost the first generation that has sent their students to a school that talks about those things, that talks about truth, goodness, and beauty as these transcendental things that you always are constantly trying to learn about. And I'd love to say it's going to get easier next generation, but there'll be some other problem that we face. But that's the beauty of it, is we get to really impact these families that are distant from their nuclear family, as it were.
And they're becoming a community where, the third grade moms are all sharing, best practices. I mean, it gets very practical when you come together in community and you guys are helping to facilitate those gatherings, whether it's in-home dinners or picnics,
selling eggs in the parking lot from their
whatever it is. It's just come do life together and let's naturally hey, how do you guys deal with, what are you going to give your kids a smartphone? Third grade?
No.
Okay.
No. Never.
But my neighbor said, no. Okay. Exactly. Well, as we kind of wind down our time, I want to make sure we have a moment we've talked about students. I mean, you guys are also very intentional through your house program. And I've done many a podcast on house because I believe it's one of the most powerful culture forming tools that we have at our disposal, where you kind of use peer pressure in a positive way, where the older students are mentoring the younger. Talk about how you guys as a leadership team mentor the student leaders that then mentor their peers. What does that look like in the context of house?
Yeah, I appreciate that, because it has been a really exciting period for our house. It started rocky, if I'm being honest, because we actually just stopped all house activities last year for about 3 weeks. And you can imagine, house was the most important thing for everybody. And they hit pause, and people were pretty frustrated about it until we started pushing in, saying, well, what is the point behind this? Why do we do the things in house that we do? And we got the kids in small groups, in grade levels, by, boys and girls separately. We got some feedback that they said, house has more or less lost its way. It was a great place to start over then. And we're going to give you ideas, but you have to drive the ship, or house is not going to do anything. If it's just the adults telling you what to do, it's just going to be another assignment wrapped up in the thing called house. So one of the things we did was they asked for more time. So we carved out half an hour every Tuesday, which doesn't seem like a lot of time, but in a 7-hour day, it's a pretty good chunk of time. And then they have an activity like a dodgeball or a chess tournament or something like that one Tuesday. We do social dance. So we do the Virginia reel and square dancing a second Tuesday, which is my most enjoyable one to watch by far. And the third Tuesday, we do a convocation again, where we just listen. We give them some discussions and things to think about, but we just slow things down and listen to them. And then the most exciting one is they came up with a list that's sitting here on my desk of mentorship with the students down in the grammar and logic schools. And, they're going to spend time once a month helping them learn how to tie a shoe or to tie their tie. There's some great things. They want to carve pumpkins. I'm not sure about that one with, knives all over the place, but it was a great idea, right? How they make banners to get them involved in some of the sports stuff and get them used to things. So, read them fairy tales and just do these things. So it's just this beauty because it's student driven. So we just have very few requirements. You have to do one activity outside of the school day, once a semester, and you have to do one service project. We're going to help you come up with ideas, but we want you as the leaders, the student leaders, the prefects, as we call them, to kind of run this. And then we meet with the house officers, all of them. So there's a prefect, a vice prefect, a chaplain to run our house chapels that we have. And then we call them an ensign, which is kind of the cheerleader. So they each made a flag. So when they do activities, they're waving their flag around. And we meet with them, periodically, of just training them. What was it like? Talk to us about, how it's going. We had one young lady that's the prefect that was really struggling with some of the other people in her house that were kind of pulling things down. And we said, do you want us to be part of a conversation? She said, no, I want to try it first. Just give me some pointers. And we did. And she had this beautiful conversation, So we're trying to teach them what it is to be a leader and what's expected of a leader and how they do that. So it's so much more than, hey, on Tuesdays, we're playing dodgeball for half an hour. Right. It's you're being led because you're going to be a leader anyway. The type of person we're raising and discipling and cultivating is going to be a leader in their home, in their community, in their church. We want to help them learn the right way to lead.
Yeah. Well, and again, just a reminder that this is something that takes time. It's intentional. Yeah. And I've talked to a lot of folks who have house programs that are kind of mediocre. It's not that great. It takes a lot of effort to do it and to give ownership to the students. And I think that sounds like some really healthy work you're doing there, David. So just kind of as a final question, just a kind of open-ended question, just any just final words of encouragement to those who are listening on forming culture that maybe you want to emphasize for us here at the end?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, and I think for parents, it's something that's hard to measure, right? You get a report card, you see the grade, you get your CLT score, you see where you might get in. Culture is tough to measure, but the time that the school puts into it, and we'd invite you to be part of as parents, is so important. In some ways, it's where a lot of the true education really takes place. It's good that they learn Latin. It's good that they read the great books and study arithmetic, but it's where we really see them. The walls come down a little bit with them. To fellow school leaders, to teachers, keep going. The dividends we may not see while they're here. We might not see for 25 years. Some of them we may not see. It's the beauty and the curse of free will. But what we're, cultivating, the gardening that we're doing is absolutely worth it. And I would encourage you in particular in March, that it is absolutely worth every second that you devote to it, because you're showing these kids that you care about them. There's somebody that loves them. And we point them to the one in Jesus who ultimately loves them. So keep your head down and keep pressing ahead. It's absolutely worth it. It's a joy to do, as you know. But my encouragement is to keep going.
Well said, David. Thank you so much for your time and for modeling well, forming healthy culture in our schools and our homes. I appreciate your
Thanks,
time.
Dave. It's great to work with my team here. That really drives the ship in this. But thank you for having me as always.
Tim, what is the purpose of classical education?
classical education is designed as a great gift of Western civilization to be passed down from one generation to the next. So each generation is responsible to entrust the next generation with the knowledge, traditions, and wisdom of the past. And so that's why we love classical Christian education in America and throughout the West, is because we pass on the great traditions of our society, of our culture. And we also pass on the mistakes, not for them to be repeated, but for them to be learned from and grow from, so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. That's one of the reasons we emphasize history, so that we can learn from the past as we pass on the great traditions of the West.
What an incredible education that we get to be a part of. It's so great to not be chasing the latest fad. We get to know that what our children are learning has stood the test of time. Thanks for that great answer.
Hey everybody, my name is Grant and I'm the producer of Basecamp Live. I want to thank you all so much for listening to this episode and remind you to take our survey, which we just released on our website. You can also find it in the show notes. This gives you an opportunity as the listener to tell us what you want to see more of and what you want to see less of potentially. Also, don't forget to give Basecamp Live a rating on your podcast app and share it with your friends. Thanks so much.